In 1969, I owned a copy of NRBQ's first album, and it has stuck with me ever since. That's about 52 years, particularly two songs, Come On If You're Comin' and Rocket Number 9, were songs that in moments when tunes would come to my imagination and I'd just find myself working and humming a tune, driving and humming a tune. It was quite often Rocket Number 9 or Come On If You're Comin'. And about a year ago, I was humming one of those tunes, driving to Florida from Maine. And I stopped overnight in North Carolina and downloaded the remastered version of NRBQ's first album. And I realized recently I had no idea who the drummer was on that album. And I did some research and discovered it is Tom Staley. And Tom was with NRBQ as their original drummer on the band's first 4 albums. And so it was NRBQ with Carl Perkins, Workshop, and Scraps. I wanted to find out something about Tom Staley, so I searched online for Tom Staley, found several references to him, and finally sent an email to a band he had been with called the Vodka Knots in Tampa, Florida for a few years, and introduced myself and told the band I was trying to track down Tom Staley. And a couple of days later, I received an email from Tom Staley, and one thing led to another. He is now living in Georgia, and I told him the story I just told on the beginning of this introduction and asked if he'd care to be interviewed for my blog, and he graciously consented to an interview. So here is 52 years after my first hearing him, an interview with Tom Staley. He was home in Georgia, and I was home in Maine, and we did this by phone in one setting back in early May, the year 2023. So enjoy. So what I went and did is I went back and listened 2 or 3 times to each of the first 4 NRBQ albums, and I listened to We're All Okay Now, and there were 2 other albums that were mentioned that I can't find the albums, but I was able to find on YouTube individual tracks that I listened to and took down some notes and things. All I know about you and your background anyway is from a not-so-modern drummer interview done in 2017, and where you were basically described as, before going into NRBQ, drum and bugle corps, kind of a jazzer who liked Joe Morello, and that's about all I know of that era of your life, and thought maybe you could fill that out a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, they covered it pretty well. I started, I was fascinated by the neighbor, my neighbor who played drums, and so I took to it right away. So I was age 10, and then it turned into the sticks on the furniture and my parents yelling at me for beating everything up. And then you got a pad, and meanwhile it kept going across the street. And he would manage to get some drums and bring them into his house, and had a friend who had a set. And I just got fascinated with the whole thing and really took to it. But then I ended up with a toy drum set, which I beat to death, I think, in one day. Finally, my parents said, well, let's get him a real snare drum. So that's where I ended up on the snare drum, and then it ended up with a set probably a year after that, right?
Yeah.
Lessons. But still, it was like a hobby. You know, I was fascinated with playing. But at that time, it was in competition with everything else, because in Fort Lauderdale, you had scuba diving and free diving and and water skiing and football. I was really active, as a teenager. And then I got serious about it. Met some other musicians, and I think it was age 13 was my first band. So there we are, teenagers with slick back hair, playing Rebel Rouser and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Ventures and really cool stuff. Meanwhile, I was in the drum and bugle corps, which was great for rudimental chops, and really got that down really well. Moved at that time into the teenage bands and stuff like that, and then shortly after that, it was a few years after that, I found Dave Brubeck Quartet and Joe Morello, and just was taken with his playing. Ended up going to, I think, 3 or 4 Morello clinics.
Really?
Saw Brubeck at least 4 times. Actually played at my high school once, which was really cool. And I got to slip backstage and meet Joe. It was in competition with all these other syncopates trying to put his drums together for him.
Did you get a chance to talk with Joe Morello?
Only at the show that they did in my high school auditorium.
Yeah.
Not intimately or anything like that.
Okay.
Just how much I loved his playing and all this. And, oh, yeah, how long have you played? That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I did get to hang with the quartet, with the other guys. They were looking for directions on how to get to a motel. So it was, and Joe wasn't there. He hadn't shown up, but it was Brubeck and Desmond. It was just fun, just hanging outside the gym, giving them directions.
Yeah.
And just hanging with them, goofing off and stuff.
What do you remember the first time hearing Joe Morello? Like what track, what cut you were listening to that just really grabbed your attention?
Well, Take 5.
Okay.
Yeah, because it became a hit, so it was everywhere.
Have you heard I think it came out last year. There was an outtakes album from the Time Out. Was that the name of that album? Yeah, Time Out. And so there's at least one alternate Take 5, and Joe Morello's drum solo on that is a real killer. I mean, the one that came out on the record is good, but when you hear it compared with Joe's solo on Take 1 or whatever it was, it's just it's like, wow, pretty incredible.
I think the Carnegie Hall stuff where he plays in 5/4 on Castilian drums.
Yes.
That's the primo for sure.
Yep. Yeah, he was an amazing guy. Were there other jazz drummers who caught your attention?
Yeah. I mean, Shelly Manne really took me out. I just loved Shelly's playing.
Yeah.
Of course, Buddy. What can you say? I mean, he's just in a place by himself. You can't really compare him to anyone else. It's just amazing. And Gene, obviously Gene. Roy Haynes.
Yes.
Yeah, Roy he's like at the top for me, I know it's hard to put all these guys in some kind of order, but when it gets right down to the drummers, Tony's at the top. What can I say?
Yeah.
I mean, he started using 2Bs, towards the end of his career.
Yes.
I mean, just amazing, just power, and of course Elvin.
Yeah.
And then his pop stuff, Hal Blaine and Earl Palmer. Those guys are on everything that you hear just about. Also, you don't forget DJ Fontana.
Right.
He was a big influence on me as well.
Okay.
Well, of course, Charlie and Ringo. It doesn't get much better than that. And then somebody that I discovered, I guess, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, was Steve Jordan. Of course, Steve took Charlie's place, in the Stones. So. Talk
about a tough seat.
Right. Other drummers, I don't know, Philly Joe.
Mm-hmm.
Louis Bellson.
Yeah.
Some of the newer guys like Dave Weckl, Jack DeJohnette.
Okay.
Benny Collado.
Yes.
I really love Jeff Hamilton's playing, man, his brushwork and everything. Billy Cobham.
So pretty much everybody that could play was an influence.
Yeah, Alex Acuna.
Yeah.
Well, Jocko and I were good friends. We were teenage buddies and stuff. So Peter showed up, with Weather Report, and I was, man, and Alex Acuna, of course.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, Lenny White.
Yeah. Jocko is such a brilliant. I got to see him play twice. Once with Weather Report, and once in I think it was Fifth Avenue South, a nightclub in Manhattan. and he was there. I'm trying to think who was. It was a small band. It's like a quartet. Ronnie Cooper on baritone, and but man, oh man, he literally brought tears to my eyes watching, particularly with that band, and it just.
Yeah, I knew Jocko when he first picked up the bass, and the only thing he could play was the bass line from Knock on Wood. And everything he approached had that same feel to it. So I watched him blossom. But, I disappeared for about 5 years with NRBQ. And when I came back, Jocko had just turned into he's so down with technique, man. He just blew everybody away. But, we'd play racquetball together and stuff. We were just teenage, hangout kind of guys and stuff, mainly through bands.
For yourself, would you say that drumming came easy to you? Was it maybe a bit of a struggle, but you just persisted in learning it?
Drumming was real easy for me. I just fell right into it. It was like a natural thing.
So you didn't struggle with?
No.
Okay, interesting.
I just wish I'd ended up going to Berkeley or something, but I ended up going another direction, hanging with NRBQ, which was a whole other story into itself. I would have liked to have the formal education and gone on. But, have a family and you have kids, and it's just like one thing leads to another. And, I don't know, do you have kids?
I do not. Grandkids.
Okay.
Grandkids now. I've got a 9-year-old grandson, so I frequently refer to myself as a new father.
Good for you.
Yeah, he's a good little guy. The history I've read on you merging with NRBQ is a little bit jumbled. It seemed to have happened in Miami and then rolled around a little bit, kind of unclear until you wound up in Columbia Studios to do that first album. Can you sort that transition?
I can show you. I can tell you about the transition. I had come back from Kansas City with some of my buddies that we went out there to try to make it as a band. This was in spring of '68. And when I got back to Fort Lauderdale, a friend of mine said, hey, this band, NRBQ, which used to be the 7 of us, is auditioning drummers. Maybe you should go try out. So I got a hold of, who did I get a hold of?
Terry?
No, it wasn't Terry. Anyway, I ended up auditioning at the Image Club down in Miami Beach. Not before I saw them, I went to see them play once, And that's what happened. I went to see them play and introduced myself.
Okay.
Because Joe Lala was subbing on drums because they didn't have a regular drummer. Joe Lala was from the Blues Image.
Yes.
And anyway, ended up auditioning, and they liked the way I played. And I had a jazz history, I could fit in nicely with the monk stuff and other stuff that Terry liked to play. And then Steve and I hit it off because I love Lonnie Mack. Of course, that's his mentor, right? So that worked out, and I joined the band, and that's that summer of '68. And we ended up going to New York in November, I think it was. End of October and November. Playing at a club up there, which hated us because we were just a bunch of hippies, right? Is what they called us.
Yeah.
It didn't last long. That's a lot of that's in the High Noon stuff about the Choo Choo Club and all the history there.
Is that the one of what I really enjoyed reading was the CD booklet that came with the reissue of the first NRBQ album. I thought whoever put that together did a good job, and it was fun reading more about how that album all came to be.
Right, I think it mentions in there about us going to the Choo Choo Club and living there for a little while and getting the record contract. The booklet that's in High Noon.
Yeah, that I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, the High Noon is the 50th anniversary release. It's got everything in it. You got to get that for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, anyway, it talks about that. But that's what happened. We lived in New York there for a while, but our manager, Frank Scalero, found a backer to take us into the record plant. So we already had the album made when we played at Steve Paul's scene and created such a scene there for sure. you know, and then Clive Davis came down and saw the band, and they signed us.
Do you remember talking with him, or did he
Yeah,
talk?
I do. I remember he's leaning up against the wall there, and Steve Paulsine, Terry introduced me to him. He says, "You guys got a nice band here. I like this band."
One of the things that I've spent time in interviewing drummers is talking about the business side of things, and I've learned a lot of that. And so let me stop here for a second. Clive Davis approaches you and he wanted to sign you. As you look back on that, would you do it the same way today? Should you have done something different before signing on the dotted line?
No, I think it was worked out the way it was supposed to work out. I just wish that we had been able to make the second NRBQ album instead of putting us together with Carl. Don't get me wrong. I thought that was a great album. I love it. I loved it to death. And working with Carl was just a fantastic experience. But I wish there had been a second NRBQ album.
You're anticipating my questions. I've got that written right down in front of me. Why was the follow-up album with Carl Perkins?
Well, they wanted to get rid of us and Carl at the same time. So
is that true?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we had one album left, and I guess we weren't selling. So, and then Carl was unhappy or something like that. So they put us together with him, which is, it turned out to be great. But that's how that went. Carl, I think, was on, what was that secondary label that Columbia has?
Oh, what did they have back then? They had Epic?
Horizon or something. I don't forget what it was.
Okay. So, I mean, Columbia signs you, and reading in that first album CD reissue booklet, I think it was, Terry's quoted as saying, if we had redone other takes of those songs, they would have been different. We just never played the same song twice. So I wonder, when Columbia says to you, well, you weren't what we expected, or what happened? Did anybody talk about, geez, when we signed you guys, this was our expectation, but this is different, and we don't like this, or any of that happen?
Well, they released Stomp, and it just didn't do very well. Then we had another tune, You Got Me Going, and that didn't do very well either. So I guess, we didn't really come up to their expectations. Plus, I think the live shows, we never played the same song twice the same way.
Yeah.
And so the live shows were a whole different thing. I don't think they understood the band as live the way that we came off. So that might have been part of it as well.
Were there rehearsals for those songs on the first album?
No, those were all first takes. But we got the tunes together somewhere else. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you went, did you know what you wanted to do when you went into the studio that first time?
Well, I think we had played. We rehearsed, some of the tunes, but something like I Didn't Know Myself. Steve kind of just came up with that, and we just played it first take in the studio. Bergie's Prayer. Yep. Of course, I'm not on that, but that was something that he just came up with that wasn't rehearsed. There's a little bit of rehearsal, but as far as the takes go, there was just one take on everything.
Okay. That seemed to be, when I listened to Scraps Workshop, about an hour before this interview, I discovered the Ludlow's Garage, 1970. I went, So I've only listened to 3 of the tracks from that online. But as I listened to the band, that was my impression, that this is a band that played a lot together. So had that going for it, but it was an improvisational band to a great degree.
We didn't write sets out. We just went on stage and played. Okay. And, you could hear little hints of tunes that might be coming next, but that was about it. And then later on after I left, when Tom replaced me, and with Al, they just became a real seamless quartet. It was just like the transition from tune to tune was just seamless.
Like Miles' second great quintet, just rolling.
About the first group is sometimes on stage we'd would have discussions or argue about what tune to do next, which was kind of stupid, in front of the audience. So all that disappeared, after I left, and became really seamless. Really admired that the band took off like that. It just became a well-oiled machine, so to speak. I hate to use that term, machine. It wasn't a machine, but you know what I'm saying.
So you recorded with Eddie Kramer. He's kind of a legendary music engineer. What was that? What was he like, and what was that like? And I asked that question on two levels. One, as far as the overall sound of the band, but then specifically as an engineer recording your drums.
Well, if I understand your question, what was it like? He's a really great engineer. So it was a pretty eye-opening experience for him to work with us. I remember one time he tried to use a wah-wah somewhere, and we weren't into that kind of stuff. We just wanted the music to be pure.
Yeah.
And come on, he worked with Jimmy.
Yeah.
So he was kind of letting that fly in there. I think it was really funny. It was on Come On Everybody. I think he said, try this, listen to this. And he put it on the board, It was like, oh, no, Eddie, no. No, but he was great. He was a really, really fun guy to work with, and really a perfectionist, what can I say? As far as the drums go, that was the drum kit that was in the studio. I think I used my snare drum.
Really? Do you remember what it was?
I think it was...
Rogers, maybe.
No, I think it was Ludwig, actually. Not sure.
Okay.
That's funny. I don't remember that.
How about your snare? What were you using?
Oh, I had a Ludwig chrome snare, 6.5 by 14.
Okay.
Yeah.
And cymbals?
See what I had. I had a 20-inch Stilton for the ride, and there was a cymbal there with the kit. It was a nice crash cymbal, so that stayed on the left. And the hi-hats, there were the hi-hats that were in the studio. It was kind of a whirlwind, Just kind of throw me in there, and here we go.
Were you in a booth?
Yeah, not a complete booth, but I had what do you call it?
3/4 of a booth, like a
barriers around it.
Yeah. Were you comfortable with the way the band was set up in the studio?
Oh yeah, it was great.
Okay. All right.
We could see each other really well. Yeah, it was fun. It was great. It was like a dream come true. Here we are.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Slap Song was the first thing we recorded, and I couldn't believe the way we sounded. It was like on the playback, it was like, God, that's us.
That's us, yeah. It certainly is a great, what I call a good riff band, great riff band, just like, Basie or Skinner again. I mean, they're just coming up with these riffs, sometimes leads in the song, but sometimes supporting in the background, and primarily the guitarist, not always. Whichever guitarist appeared on those first 4 albums was just brilliant at doing that, as well as the leads. So it's fun to listen to.
Yeah, the first two albums were Steve, and then Al showed up. The last two that I played on anyway. Workshop and Scraps. Al Anderson on guitar.
Yeah, just a great player. But when you moved to Kama Sutra, somebody, and it may have been the Connie Chung report on NRBQ, but somewhere John Sebastian showed up, and they're interviewing him, asking him about the band. And he was saying on this report that NRBQ was carrying forth the Love and Spoonful torch. And I'm paraphrasing him now, but it was almost like John Sebastian saying, yes, Love and Spoonful is no longer with us. However, NRBQ is, and that he was happy about that. So I was kind of curious, since Kama Sutra was Spoonful's label, if Sebastian had anything to do with the band going with that label.
No, I don't think so at all. In fact, from what I understand, Sebastian had to be almost led to listen to NRBQ by Zal. He just put off, listening to NRBQ, and finally Zal, he said, "You got to hear these guys." And he was led to a live show. But no, I don't think he had anything to do with that.
Okay. So from the band's perspective, your perspective, how was recording for Kama Sutra different from recording for Columbia? If I'm right, Eddie Kramer, again, was the engineer on both Scraps and Workshop?
Yeah, well, again, that was Electric Lady, so that was his studio.
Okay.
So all that stuff was done at Electric Lady. Great studio.
From your perspective, was it different, or was it just felt the same? It just happened to be a different label.
Yeah, it just felt the same. It just, we had Al with us, so material was different, and everything was still, NRBQ.
And then bringing in the horns, like NRBQ was horn. I think that was a Workshop, right?
Right.
How did that all come to pass?
Well, I mean, we always had Keith Spring was on sax, a friend of Terry and Don's.
Yeah.
Don on trombone. So they were always at the live shows as well. So all of a sudden there are horn parts on the record. So there we go.
Okay, I've never seen the band live, so I.
Oh, you have?
No, I never did. Never saw the band live. It just stuck with me from that first album, primarily. That's why I kind of regret as well, just an hour before the interview, hearing Ludlow Garage. Went, what? I know there are other NRBQ live albums, not with you on drums, so that was fun to hear. I'll have to listen again. So when you thinking back on all that, any particular stories or memories, either playing live in the studio, anything stand out for you as a particular highlight?
Oh, let's see. The first album really takes the cake because it was the most exciting. That really wins the prize. But as far as standing out, I don't know. Let's see. When I think of particular tunes that we played, I mean, what was more fun than the others or something like that? Or
more fun, or maybe running particular gigs that just stood out, maybe meeting your heroes or along the road, or just anything within those 4 years that just, wow, I'm glad that happened. I'm glad I'll have that memory.
Well, the most fun was playing with the band live. I mean, of course, we all lived together. You knew that, right?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, we all lived in a big house in upstate New York.
Okay, whereabouts?
It was called Bull's Head Road. It was near Stanfordville, right off the Taconic Parkway.
Okay.
Yeah. So we moved from there. We all lived in different places in New York City in 1969. And all of a sudden, we're in this big farmhouse. So the next 2 years were spent based out of that farmhouse. And it was cool. It was like, our wives, a bunch of dogs and cats, and, just that whole lifestyle was really fun. And then we ended up, after we took a break and everything and came back, and just before the Scraps tour, we had gotten this big old bus, and that's when we went out west for 3 or 4 months in this old Greyhound bus, and that was the gas, it was just a whole lot of fun. So that whole period of time there was great.
Now, you were working with a manager, so your manager was doing your bookings and things?
Some of it, but Sidney Seidenberg showed up. He used to book B.B. King and a bunch of other acts, and he booked a lot of that stuff, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, we ended up playing the Whiskey A Go-Go, went all the way to L.A. and different points in between. And
you sent me that ad, that Sonar ad. So, A, how did the Sonar endorsement come about? And then B, were you doing any clinics for Sonar, anything of an educational nature for those drums?
No, nothing like that. I don't remember how the Sonar came up. It's funny. All of a sudden, it was like, yeah, Sonar wants to get you a set of drums. So we went out to the factory and picked out a set. It was great. Okay. That's what's on the Cincinnati stuff that you listen to.
Okay. All right. Yeah, those were great drums.
Yeah. It was a little 20-inch bass drum, by the way, and small tom-toms, so it was like a different kind of sound.
8x12s and 14x14 type.
Yeah.
Shelly Manne set.
Yeah, it was great. Nobody was playing drums like that. I don't know how I ended up with that, but I just liked that. It's like the little drum set. It was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a little set of Gretsch. I have a big set too, but I have a little set of Gretsch that's 20, same size that I had back then. And I love it because I use the bass drum, and it's got the higher tone to it. So I use it kind of like a tom-tom.
Why did you eventually leave NRBQ?
It came down to my wife and I were the first couple to have a child. And, I know you don't have a family, but, we had a child, and we moved out of the group house because we all lived together.
Yep. And
that kind of put a separation there, right? And then our attention was on the child, on my son. And it was killing me. I'd have to go off and play and leave for 2 weeks. In fact, right after he was born, I think a week after he was born, I had to go play a 2-week engagement someplace.
Oof.
And it was like, I don't know, this is pretty strange. It was like I was torn. And anyway, make a long story short, it kind of went on for a while until he was about a year old. And it got to the point where I just wanted to be with my family. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to be away. And it wasn't like a Grateful Dead scene where we were all kind of, you know what I mean? That whole scene where we're all a big family and everybody has kids and, everybody moves at the same time and goes different places. And it wasn't like that, So it separated us, Eventually I just decided, let's go. And plus Steve had come back. He had left the band and come back too. And he wanted to go to Florida. So I just left the band. We moved back to Fort Lauderdale. Steve and I tried to put something together down there, but it didn't really pan out.
Okay.
Ended up staying. And then, of course, once you have a family, you have to support them. So,
it's amazing, huh?
Yeah, so here I go. It's like one cover band after the other. That became the way I supported my family. And back then, you could play 6 nights a week and stay at the same club for months.
Nice.
So, house gigs, right?
Yep.
So a steady thing. But, to be honest with you, is like after a while, it was like I really missed playing in the band. What can I say? I have to be honest. I really missed it a lot. So I was torn between, not that I was going to leave, but I just wanted to have that same feeling back, that playing with musicians like that. And of course, when you're playing in cover bands, I played with a lot of great musicians, but it wasn't the same at all, So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Just the family just kind of took precedence over everything.
2 questions. One, did you ever collaborate with NRBQ, with individual musicians, but was there ever a time where you went back in and maybe subbed for a week or anything like that?
No, nothing like that. They lived in upstate New York, and I lived in Fort Lauderdale. So
okay.
Quite a separation there. But Steve Ferguson and I played a lot together. In fact, Steve came down to Fort Lauderdale because, he had left the band too. So it's like I had a house gig there with a country band, and he came down and played for a couple years, and we hung out down there together before he went back to Louisville.
Okay.
So we did some stuff on our own, the two of us, a lot of recording too as well.
How about lessons? Did you ever get into drum lessons or?
I had a few students for a while, but I don't know. It's just, just didn't take.
Okay. And then kind of curious, from what I could see on that you have no writing credits on the NRBQ albums, but then fast forward a bunch of decades and you're writing your own songs, you're singing, you're playing guitar, keyboards, all kinds of stuff. How did that transition take place?
Well, I picked up the guitar. So, I can play tunes on the guitar. I'm not a very good soloist, but, I picked up the guitar as a second instrument. And I still play. I learn tunes, and I love learning Beatle tunes and stuff. And that led me in the direction of writing tunes.
Okay.
So I would write a tune on the guitar and just went in and did it myself, When you see the CD, when I send you these CDs, a friend of mine in Louisville and I collaborated. We did everything online, basically. It was pretty wild. I had to learn Pro Tools, and I spent like months in a friend's studio laying down all my tracks. One of these CDs has got 6 of his tunes and 6 of mine, and I'm playing all the instruments on a lot of them.
Was that hard to do at first?
Yeah, it was difficult. Learning Pro Tools was hard, but I got it down eventually. It was fun after a while.
Do you think you'll still write songs and record them?
I'd like to get back into doing that again. I really would, because I've got a nice recorder downstairs.
Okay.
It's just, getting it together to do the situation as it is.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's still out there.
Okay.
You haven't asked me about
the Vodka Knot.
Yeah. So, are you familiar with that?
A little bit, just again from researching you and coming across a couple of YouTube videos of the Vodka Knots, and that they have a website and a Facebook page. So that's how I'm familiar with them.
4 years with those guys, and we're living in St. Pete.
Okay.
And then I had my own blues band for a while. I'll send you all this stuff so you can come up to speed.
Okay.
The Vodka Knots were fun. I know what we haven't talked about. After I left the band, remember I told you, Steve and I moved back to Fort Lauderdale for a few years, and he came down.
Yeah.
And eventually Jonathan Edwards called me because their drummer had some issues and had to leave the band.
Okay.
I joined John through Bear Shinneman, who's a good friend of ours, who was a recording engineer up there in New York. Anyway, he used to be a roadie for NRBQ. He called me and said, "Look, Jonathan, I'd met Jonathan a few years back when we were with NRBQ, and he said, we need a drummer right now. We need you to fly out." So I flew out to New Orleans and started playing with them, and we went on the road for, I think, 3 months. And that was a gas. That was a whole lot of fun. Then Steve actually joined us for a little while, but it didn't work out. And then when I got back in 77, I had made some connections up there, and Steve and I regrouped, so to speak, and went up to Massachusetts and tried to get something together. And we had a band called the Soul Drivers, the L&M Soul Drivers, standing for Louisville and Miami.
Yeah.
And did some live recording, and there's a great recording of us. But Steve is such a phenomenal guitar player.
Yeah.
I brought along a really good friend, a great bass player named Robert Marcus, and he's on this stuff as well. And I don't know, it should be released here pretty soon. I'd love to see if I could get it out. I know I played some of it for Terry, and Terry said maybe 1 or 2 tracks could be out there. It was a fun band to play with. Steve's always a gas to play with. So.
Yeah, geez, I'd love to hear that. When you're gigging, do you just kind of leave the miking and everything about your drums to somebody else and walk out and play, or are you pretty careful about how your drums sound, how they're positioned, and all that?
No, most of it was club gigs, especially up here. So I had a mic on the bass drum, a nice mic, and then I had a few overheads to pick up the cymbals, and then my vocal mic. Mm-hmm. So between the three, pretty well covered the whole set.
You mentioned blues band. Do you have blues drummers that you particularly like?
Oh, God, Sam Lay comes to mind.
Yeah.
Isn't that funny? The Mike Bloomfield's band?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, great. When I did that history of rock drumming, I started with blues, the blues drummers, all the chess guys. And there again, who were these guys? Who are these guys? So
I've forgotten who that was. There's a main guy that used to play with
Fred Below was one.
Yeah,
of the,
Fred Below.
Yeah.
Thank you for me. Yeah, Fred. I played in a hardcore blues band up here. Felix and the Cats was the name of the band.
Yep.
These guys were blues snobs, man. I'm telling you, it's like riding in the van to the gigs and stuff. We played out of town. It was just an education, and I remember who that was. And it's like, wow, some of these guys. Fred in particular.
And
stuff that he came up with, some of these the skip shuffle things,
Yep. He takes credit for what became 12-bar blues. He said, he got, when he first started playing with Muddy Waters, he said, these were all country blues guys. And so they'd play 7.5 measures and 4 measures. And Fred had come out of, he was in the Army band and he had graduated the Roy Knapp School of Percussion in Chicago, so he was a highly trained guy, and he's sitting and they're changing wherever they felt like it, and he claimed credit with getting them to play 12-bar blues, 16-bar blues, and going like that. But yeah, he's a remarkable guy.
That's an amazing story.
Yeah.
Yeah, and who played with Chuck Berry? Was that Fred?
There were a bunch of different ones. If you go on my blog, I've got I posted my the audio from my interview with Fred, and I just loved his playing. So he was a great guy to listen to. But with Chuck Berry, I'm trying to think who the players were now.
Well, Johnny Johnson played piano.
Yes.
So he's the man. That's a big influence on Terry.
And I saw Chuck with those guys at the Fillmore East in New York City. The first time I saw him, he had, I don't know if they were the original guys, but he had the upright bass, he had the acoustic piano on, and it sounded great. And I've never heard him sound that good since, because I think those were probably the original guys that played on his records. But another guy I found that was a good interview was Bo Diddley's drummer. You know, who's playing the Bo Diddley beat on these So I finally tracked down Clifton James.
Clifton James, right? Well, I backed up Bo Diddley 2 or 3 times.
Did you?
Yeah, it was a gas playing with him. In fact, he hopped up on my drums on one of the shows, and then he played his version of what's going on. It was like, this is amazing. Bo Diddley's playing my drums.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
But the thing about Chuck Berry, I want to say, you probably know this already, being thrown into recording with Chuck and playing with Chuck, it added that swing feel to Chuck's straight ahead chugging, yes. Straight eighths chugging on the guitar, real straight, right?
Yep.
And they're swinging underneath it with the walking bass. It's so funny, like in the years after when I was to play with cover bands and stuff, and I try to tell musicians about what was going on, and they just were like, what? No, man. The bass player's got to go, play straight, chug it ahead. Like, no, swing. No, man, no swing.
That was most of the white guys who played blues. They play no dynamics, too loud, and like you said, they play with that straight eighth feel instead of that tension of some straight eighths, but swinging as well. And
right. Well, the magic with Chuck though was like that's what he played, and they were used to swinging a little bit. So it's like that's what made that whole sound, that rock and roll. That's the roll that's in the rock,
Yeah. And
so that was missing from a lot of bands after that. They just didn't understand what was happening.
When I wrote that piece, I mean, it's obvious after it dawned on me, but I'm thinking, well, of course, all these guys like DJ Fontana and J.M. Van Eaton and all that, they came up listening to swing. That's what they had. That's their roots. So of course, they're going to be playing with at least a semblance of swing drumming in that early rock stuff. Sun Records and Chess Records and all that.
Yeah.
So
that's a good deal.
Yep. All right, Tom. Anything that you'd like to add?
Just that this is an endorsement for the new band, which is really not the new NRBQ because they've been together for over 10 years now. But the band that Terry put together, they're just incredible, and the albums they've been putting out for the last 10 years or so. And John Perrin, the drummer they have now. And also, I did give a nod to Tom Artolino, which was a big influence on me because Tom took my drumming and kind of went to a whole other place with it. So he needs to get credit for that. And then after Tom died, Conrad Chakroon, which I thought was a perfect replacement for Artolino. He should get a nod too because he really added a whole lot. These are all the guys that came after me. So, I want to give them credit.
Okay. I wondered when I was researching you, there were several places referenced you as the original NRBQ drummer. Are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I am the original NRBQ drummer. Okay. I am the man.
It's a great legacy for sure.
Oh, that's some of my best drumming right there. Most improvisational because I was thrown into that situation. It being one take band like that in the studio.
Yeah.
I really wasn't coming from that place. I like to rehearse a little bit more and hone it down. But, it brings out the best in you when you have to go in under pressure and just play.
And the red light goes on, and you're like, okay, showtime.
And with those guys, you didn't know what was going to happen because it was always different. So it was a real exciting challenge, to try to keep up. And I tell you, a lot of times, man, I'm just holding on for dear life.
I believe that. I believe that.
Yeah.
In closing, do you remember what you were thinking that first night before you auditioned for the band and you went to see them? Do you remember your thoughts at the time?
Well, see, I knew those guys from the previous band called the Seven of Us.
Okay.
So I knew Terry and Joey, not personally, but I'd seen them play a bunch of times. So I was really impressed by the musicianship, and I couldn't wait to audition to see if I could land this gig. And it was just amazing the way things turned out. That's the way it was supposed to be.